to Christ the Center, your weekly conversation of Reformed theology. My name is Camden Busey, and I'm in Grayslake, Illinois today. And I'm excited to be back with another episode here of our flagship program that we've been at for many, many years. And we've had on the program before our guest today. We're going to be talking about some new stuff, though, some really exciting things. And today I'm joined by Dr. Eric Watkins, who serves as senior pastor of Harvest Presbyterian Church, OPC congregation there in San Marcos, California, as well as the director for the Center for Missions and Evangelism at Mid-America Reformed Seminary. Hey, Eric, how's it going today?
Very well, very well. It's nice to see you, Camden.
You too. Yes, it's been fun to interact. I serve on the board at Mid-America Reformed Seminary, and now you're on board in a new capacity, and we get this opportunity here to discuss some of these new initiatives and an upcoming event. So we got a lot of layers here. We're going to be speaking about what this is, the Center for Missions and Evangelism, but we're also going to be speaking about your major launch event entitled, well, the theme is More Salt, More Light, Church in an Age of Opportunity, which will be held January 28th and 29th in 2022. For those who might be listening years into the future, check it out. There'll be more events to come. But for those listening when this gets published, head on down to the website. We'll have links in the episode description for all that. But it's going to be at Anastasia Church in St. Augustine, Florida. St. Augustine, Florida. And no doubt it's going to be an exciting time. But there's a lot on tap. Eric, do you feel like your head's just spinning in these last several months?
You know, in some ways, yes, but at the same time, I feel like I'm doing things that I really enjoy doing. In some ways, it's one of the more fruitful seasons of life in ministry. We have 4 kids and a busy household and always great reasons to be at home, and probably no happier place I'd rather be. And at the same time, it seems like the Lord has laid certain things in front of me and in front of the church that are also really exciting kingdom work. So the opportunity to serve the church and even try to reach out to people, not only for the gospel, but to reach out through churches that are trying to reach people for the gospel, is a really exciting privilege as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of important things going on. And you've taught some courses at Mid-America before, haven't you? I no doubt at a couple seminaries, but one of those was an evangelism class, wasn't it?
Yeah, they've let me do that a few times, Missions and Evangelism course, and it's a blast. Clearly, the highlight of the class is the last day, where we actually go to some location where we can try to meet total strangers for a couple of hours and just stir up conversations that may or may not lead to some sort of an evangelistic opportunity to talk with people just about the things of God. It's a pretty awkward event in the sense that it's always hard to talk with total strangers. But as I mentioned to students in class, if you can do that, everything else is easy. So there's definitely a shock effect, but no one has ever not returned from that portion of the class. We haven't lost anyone yet. And actually for a lot of the guys, I think it's been a good stretch. So it's good to spend a few days in the class talking about evangelism, but it's certainly one of those subjects where just getting out and talking to people, seeing if you can get them to open up and talk a little bit about the things of God is always a good thing to try.
Yeah, certainly. It's important. So let's talk a bit about this center. I'm going to read a blurb here, and I'll let you expand on it, but this is coming from the Mid-America website at midamerica.edu. The Center for Missions and Evangelism is a new initiative at Mid-America Reformed Seminary designed to enhance the current M.Div program with a greater missional emphasis where appropriate, as well as developing a new set of classes, conferences, cohorts, and internships focused on areas of evangelism, church planting, discipleship, and foreign missions. It is our hope and prayer that in doing so, we may help the church raise up the next generation of faithful church leaders to serve faithful churches, as well as help plant new ones at home and abroad. Now, that word missional there in the paragraph, that's come up many times in the board in terms of what is meant by that, and it's quite succinctly explained as, well, we mean Great Commission. So we're talking about Jesus' words to his disciples in Matthew 28 and seeking to equip the church to do those types of activities. But Eric, could you provide for us just a broader sense of what this center is, what you hope that it could be? And we can get into a bit of the background of why such a thing might be needed among Reformed seminaries.
Yeah, so the Center for Missions and Evangelism came about in a certain sense as the culmination of two different conversations happening at the same place, kind of swirling
Hmm.
apart from one another, that eventually intersected and created a momentum that led to the birth of the center. Uh, One with a handful of ministers that would often just seem to run into each other at conferences and different events related to subjects of missions, evangelism, church planning, those things, and just basically recognizing that while obviously a lot of the Reformed seminaries have an emphasis in one fashion or another on missions and evangelism, um, and things like church planning, at the same time, there's room for more. And if you look at the general M.Div curriculum at most seminaries, they all tap these subjects, but they tap them pretty minimally. I don't mean that critically, but just in general. Some obviously emphasize them a little bit more than others. A couple seminaries have ventured something along the lines of what we're doing, perhaps focusing on one slice of this pie, say church planting
Yeah.
or something like that. But if you're asking the question, where do you want to send a guy who's interested in pastoring a congregation, there are a lot of really good answers. If you begin to nuance the question and ask, where would you send someone that you want to learn more about doing church planting work, or someone who's preparing for the foreign mission field, then not only is there the question of classroom curriculum, but very important, the question of mentoring as well. And the Center for Missions and Evangelism at Mid-America is, number one, not trying to pretend that it's the best thing out there, but it is trying to speak into an apparent need or void by adding to a seminary curriculum additional classes in the areas that we're talking about: church planning, evangelism, and missions, but also mentorship opportunities whereby we might connect a man that's considering going to seminary with a view to one of those fields, not just the pastorate, but also church planning or the mission field, and then pairing him along the way with someone who's done that particular work. So someone who's done the work of church planning, someone who's been on the mission field, and in a certain sense, creating stronger glue between seminary and internship program, or seminary and mentoring. My skill set is very minimal and unimpressive. I have, by God's grace, planted a couple of churches and really love evangelism. But so many of the things that we contemplate being embodied in the seminary will rely on the skill set of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of like building a dream team of, if you're thinking about the area of foreign missions, who are the servants out there that have done really good work that we might be able to pair with people who are contemplating doing similar work. Same thing with church planning, other aspects. So there's sort of a four-legged stool in the Center for Missions and Evangelism. Classes being added to the seminary curriculum are one part of it. Cohorts are another, and this is pretty important, where men might be able to come together like local church leaders in an area, and there's maybe one topic on everyone's mind that they want to get together and just bond and pray together and discuss something. So maybe they would invite in a speaker. That speaker may or may not be me. It depends on the topic. Quite likely it could be somebody else for all kinds of good reasons. But they would be able to get together and play with the phrase safe space, mm-hmm. and just talk together about these things, pray together, have a beer, pizza together, and just good fellowship in the gospel. So cohorts are invitation only. Conferences like we're going to do in St. Augustine next month. By the way, St. Augustine is in Florida. St.
Right.
Augustine is in heaven.
That's right.
So that's probably the only actual helpful thing I'll say here.
And for sure, we know Florida is not heaven. So I'll just.
Some may disagree. Apparently, everyone's trying to get there. It's the new Exodus location. So anyhow, you have the classes, you have cohorts, and then conferences like we're doing in St. Augustine are a event to which we would invite all kinds of people to come. Anyone could come. So conferences, anyone can come. Cohorts is more of a small gathered group, more invitation only. Mm-hmm. But conferences, again, are just trying to speak to the questions of the day. Today there's a context that shapes the way we do ministry. There are certain challenges right now in ministry. There are challenges to establish churches. There are challenges to planting churches. Mm-hmm. I've commented And many times recently, the attrition rate right now is really sobering. More pastors have quit in the last 2 years than in the last decade combined. And sure, that's attributable to things like COVID, social justice dynamics, abuse narratives, and just fatigue and exhaustion in ministry. So those questions shape a certain sensitivity now, and cohorts or conferences might be a way of serving local or gathered churches to that end. So three legs of the stool: classes, cohorts, conferences, and then finally would be the mentoring internship program. And every seminary has required field hours. At Mid-America, they have a ministerial apprentice program that overlaps with what we're talking about now in terms of trying to connect guys that seem uniquely interested, possibly gifted in church planning, with someone who has already done that work and might prove to be a good mentoring pastor. Some of the NAPARC denominations, OPC, PCA, URC, varying degrees, have different internship programs or requirements. More and more, what people are recognizing is that seminary can do a good job of laying the foundation for what a man may need in ministry, but there's so much that really has to be caught and cannot simply be taught. It needs to be modeled. It needs to take place through active discipleship. And we're simply trying to forge those relationships with some of those that have already gone before and done the work, enabling what may be the next generation rising up to do the same well.
Mm-hmm. I like how you put that. And certainly there is a need. I mean, any seminary that's serving NAPARC well has courses, or at least courses that have specific modules, sections that are covering these topics. But the advantage of having a center, and this isn't necessarily a literal building, although maybe the Lord will provide, and it will be someday, we'll have facilities for this sort of thing. But the idea of a center is that we would have focused study and concentration on some topic over a prolonged period of time. So, at least in my opinion, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, Eric. Historically, certainly the Reformed have been involved in missions and involved in evangelism, and missions, not just foreign missions, but also home missions or church planting. And there have been so many good things to say about many of those efforts. But if we hear the frequent criticisms, whether they're fair or not, and I think there's a grain of truth to it, Reformed churches are not, on the whole, usually considered strong in evangelism, at least understood as trying to seek the lost outside the walls of the church itself, which is often how we think of evangelism, going forth and proclaiming the truth of Christ and sharing the gospel in various ways. It's uncomfortable to a lot of people, and I'd love to hear some of the reasons for that you address in the evangelism class. But what's so exciting about a center is that we can think more persistently, and we can have events, and we can certainly have conferences, classes, these cohorts, and possibly set up internships with this particular focus to concentrate our efforts in the wider Christian church, the wider Reformed church, and at the seminary to equip people and get them excited, and to encourage people to do these things that are so critical to the church's existence, these things that the Lord has called and commanded the church to go do. So the center is a vehicle. I like the idea, and I'm excited to see how it continues to proceed.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Maybe a couple of things to interact with there.
Please.
One is, I think it's important to recognize that this thing has some mobility. So it's part restaurant, part pizza truck. In some ways, it has a brick and mortar feature, on campus at the seminary, and certainly hopes to attract students that will come and want to study and appreciate the nuances that the center will offer. At the same time, in my mind, seminaries exist for one purpose. It's really quite narrow: to serve the church. That's really it. They don't take the place of the church. They're handmaidens to the church at best. And so part of what we want to do is bring things to churches, not just simply hope that they will send students, but things like the conferences and the cohorts, those come to the church. So like we'll do in St. Augustine, we want to bring things that may help kind of urge and fan the flame within local churches to cultivate more of an outward facing disposition, or what some have referred to a culture of evangelism is what we want to cultivate.
Yeah.
Now, I'll interact
Right.
with the historical piece that you mentioned. This is a pretty important one to me. It's really fun to talk about. We do get into it for hours in the evangelism class. It is an irony, and I can't quite figure it out really, if it's even a fair, if it's a fair representation at times, that the Reformed are not inclined towards evangelism. I mean, the caricature exists because there obviously are people that have earned the nickname Frozen Chosen and things like that. But some
Right.
of the very best evangelists in history were Reformed Calvinistic types,
Absolutely.
beginning with Calvin himself in the
Right.
history of the Reformation. The ministerial registry in Geneva, Calvin's training center, was a training center, much like, his was the real deal. What we're doing is a little miniature, but, a training center for pastors and missionaries in a time where not only was the gospel being spread far away, it was being spread locally and often at the cost of one's life. So the history of the Reformation is really the history of carrying out the Great Commission, bearing Christ's cross to the ends of the earth. And then some of the great missionaries in history, even since Calvin, have been Reformed as well, both on and off this continent. So somehow, somewhere along the lines, it's kind of like in the Lord of the Rings, history became legend, legend became myth. Reformed folks were great evangelists. They got a little bit less interested, and then now we wonder, where it happens. At least in certain pockets, and
Right.
that's not so easy to explain. You have different dynamics, like the immigrant narratives of certain Reformed cultures that immigrated from parts of Europe to North America, and they didn't come here as missionaries. They came here escaping war, poverty, famine, and they were in survival mode, not like missionary mode, in that nuanced sense. And that may explain too overdeveloped ministries of inreach at the expense of outreach in a slowly developing narrative. I think there are different ways to explain it depending on the context. I also think it's important to be careful and charitable because not every perception is accurate when it comes
Absolutely.
to this. In other words, there are certain communions, let's say, that may be more evangelistically inclined than others, but I don't think you could even say simply of one denomination, for instance, that it's really evangelistic or really not, because you would have exceptions within each of those churches that would challenge any sort of a generalization.
Sure.
What I think it's helpful to say is that local churches today, wherever they're at, and I mean geographically, but also just in terms of interest in the subject, are challenged not only with the need to do evangelism outreach, they're challenged by the reality of trying to keep their covenant kids. We live in an age where social media has taken the place of the Sunday school teacher, is more influential than the catechism teacher on Wednesday night, has the ear of a young person more than most local pastors and perhaps even parents do. And that's important to think about. Like, who has the ear of our young people? Who has the ear of the rising generation? And one of the things, like it or not, that the current context of all things social justice has affected is a real sensitivity to what this question, what is the mission of the church? What does it look like if you're a Christian, to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves? What does it look like to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God? So I think like a decade ago, you could almost phrase the question in a pretty sterile way about outreach, and it was sort of detached from this concern about our covenant kids. Today, I think covenant kids need to see the church doing outreach. They need to see the church carrying out aspects of the Great Commission, showing compassion to neighbors in ways that silence the accusations of apathy and indifference that are often leveled against the church, at least in the current context. So, this is what I mean by saying there are certain challenges that are in front of the church right now. It's not simply the question of when will we win our neighbors, it's will we keep our kids.
Yeah. No, those are important things to keep in mind. And we're hoping that these efforts will help us to consider these things more seriously and with sustained effort, and also then to to do something about it. Not just the goal here is to put these things into practice, not just talk about them, but to put things. You also need to have a proper theological framework and understanding, a biblical understanding of things before you go and act too. Because we've seen a lot of evangelism efforts in general evangelicalism that were not based on biblical principles and foundations, and that leads to trouble as well. Let's talk a little bit about this event. And I think if we parse some of the speakers out and some of the topics, that might also lead to some interesting aspects of conversation. But what is the theme here? The title of the event is More Salt, More Light, Church in an Age of Opportunity. What's meant by that, Eric?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's just me thinking about the ocean. Salt and light.
You and surfing.
Yeah, let's not
Salt
keep it a
Life.
secret.
I see
That's
Salt
right.
Life cars around here, but whenever I see Salt Life, the decal on somebody's car, I just presume it's the salt from the roads in the wintertime.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that would mean up there in your neck of the woods, Camden. So, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, the light of the world," right? And that's the part of the identity of the church until the end of the age, when the kingdom is consummate and the bride is collectively and consummately gathered together. The church has a mission. That mission has been given to us by Christ. It's not that, in a certain sense, the church has a mission. Maybe a better way to put it is God has a church for his mission, right? And we are to be faithful, at least insofar as we're able to carry that out. And in the current context, as we've been talking about, there are certain challenges, and we've tried to put together a list of speakers to come and to speak into some of those challenges in a way that may help the church see this is a great time to be the church. Like, there are challenges, right? There's opposition, there's darkness. This is a great time to be the church. It's a great time to be reformed and committed to the means of grace, the doctrine of the church, the beautiful things that we have stood for historically. It's a great time, not in a sinful way to be proud, but in a biblical way, like to be proud of the things that God has given to us. Thankful maybe is a better word, but to let the light of the gospel shine through the work of the church. So the Center for Missions and Evangelism had a soft launch back in October at a nearby church not far from the seminary. This event is our hard launch and our first effort to begin taking it to the streets in the sense of hopefully being a blessing to a local congregation. Covenant OPC in St. Augustine that I pastored for about 14 years is co-sponsoring the conference with us. And some of the speakers are coming. Some are coming from the PCA, some are coming from the URCNA, and some are coming from the OPC. All of our speakers come from one of those three denominations. And we've got a beautiful location.
We might have a CanRef professor at least, right?
We do.
Is
That's
he
right. Ariane DeVisser is coming.
Yeah. I didn't know if he was in the CanRef denomination. I presume he is, being a professor there.
That's right. Don't tell him. I forgot that for a second. But yes. Ariane, who I know well and just think the world of, really fantastic
Wonderful
churchman, former missionary to South Africa, post-apartheid narrative, working with indigenous peoples, and will bring back lessons from that mission field existence and experience that will hopefully speak into some of the challenges that the church likely finds itself in now in fairly analogous ways.
So let's speak about some of the subjects that the speakers, I'll just list the speakers just for people so they can be interested. Of course, Mark Beach, who teaches at Mid-America, been teaching dogmatics there for many years. Timothy Brindle, many will know. John Curry from Westminster, Terrence Dickerson, Terry Johnson, Darby Strickland, Mark Vanderhart, Ariane DeVisser, and of course, our guest today, Mr. Eric Watkins. So that's quite a lineup of speakers here for this inaugural event. It's really exciting to see the breadth of voices and the topics that are going to be addressed.
Yeah, it's very Tolkien-esque, Fellowship of the Nine.
There's no Bifer and Bofer, Dwaylen, Balin. I'm reading The Hobbit with my kids in the evenings, and so that's on the mind.
Yeah. Would it be okay if I just gave an overview of what
Please
each
do.
person
I'd
is
love
going to
that.
talk about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So going, I think, alphabetically. So Mark Beach from Mid-America will talk about how Jesus reaches the marginalized. Again, just thinking about, how do we go about reaching those who are not simply outside our church, but maybe not the easiest to engage. That could be from homeless people to scenarios like you see the woman at the well. But how does Jesus reach the marginalized? Timothy Brindle, who's a PhD in Old Testament at Westminster, Philadelphia, and a minister in the PCA, is going to do something on a biblical theology of race, tracing the Bible's theological vocabulary as it attached to race and identity. And he's also, this is going to be fun. we're going to have some psalm singing, some a cappella psalm singing. It'll be really pretty at the concert. And over dinner, we're actually going to hear Timothy Brindle, after his presentation, do a few of his Christian hip hop songs.
Yeah.
So one of my goals for the conference is to teach a bunch of pasty white people how to clap in time. It's going to be a challenge, but I'm up for it.
In some of these circles, I'm considered swarthy.
He may have more rhythm than many I've met. So John Curry is going to talk about leadership in a context when few will follow, and just the challenge of not simply pastoral leadership, but church leadership in general. This has been a hard time to lead the last couple of years, and John Curry could be a good guy on that subject. Terrence Dickerson, who's one of my ruling elders from Covenant OPC in St. Augustine, will speak on what it's like to be a theologically conservative Black man who, on the one hand, does not consider himself to be woke in the sense that's common and often understood, but has a real concern sensitivity for the church to think rightly about race relationships and how we can find our identity in the gospel and in the church. So
it's important to bring nuance there. I'm thankful that they're going to address that, because this day and age, there's such a bifurcation. It's so binary in the sense of, you're either woke in whatever sense, but let's just take it as far left as we want to take it. You're either woke and understand and have a sensitivity to race, or you have no sensitivity to race whatsoever, and you're opposed to it and you're a racist. So bringing some good reformed nuance to this discussion is going to be really significant. No doubt Timothy will bring some of that in as well with his biblical theology of race, and then Terrence can apply it perhaps more to the contemporary situation.
Yeah, and Terrence really is the guy for it. You said it really well. You're either woke or you're racist, and it's almost as though we only allow those binary and unhelpful categories. I think someone like Terrence will bring a good bit of balance. He's also just a really beautiful individual, great story, real servant, real heart for the church. There are few men on the planet I respect more than Terrence Dickerson, so he will be fantastic. Terry Johnson from IPC in Savannah, Georgia, a real fine churchman, is going to speak on the subject of Christian identity. He has a book, Who Am I? And Christian identity in an age of confusion and plasticity will basically be his subject. Darby Strickland will be one of our, I think, heavier hitters in the sense of bringing something just really potent and powerful. But how do we recognize and address abuse in the church? What is abuse? What isn't abuse? Those are things that she is going to get into. Mark Vanderhart is going to do a biblical theology of world mission coming out of Genesis 12, which I think will be helpful and edifying, just straight up. How do we use our Bibles as we think about all this stuff? And how does the church find herself in the big story, the great drama of God's redemption? I mentioned Arion's lecture, Lessons from the Mission Field, Post-Apartheid South Africa, missionary, and things that his experience on the mission field may bring and speak into the church today. And then I'm going to speak on the mission of the church, and at least my perception, and I know people will disagree with this, but I stand on my own feet. But what I would perceive as a bit of mission drift. We wrestled with using the term in an age of distraction. In my view, the last couple of years between COVID and social justice, we've talked about a lot of things other than the gospel. Pulpits, pastoral visits, Facebook, all the social media stuff. There's been a lot of stuff that's pulled us away from talking about the gospel. I'm not trying to render those things unimportant or, altogether bad. That's not my point. But the question is, what is the mission of the church, biblically speaking? How does the Bible address those things, and how does Paul in particular resist going down the trail to the left or the right, addressing good things in order to focus on the best thing of the gospel itself. So those are the speakers. We've got fantastic meals lined up for the conference. $25 registration fee, which is really just enough to cover the meals and give people, when you give people things for free, they sometimes wonder if they're worth that much. So we didn't just want to give it away, but we figured $25 was modest enough to hopefully even get a few very frugal Orthodox Presbyterians to show up.
Did you say food? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I should mention it's the conference location is literally a half mile from the beach, and the closest hotels are like walking distance from the Atlantic Ocean. And so late January in Florida, only a fool would stay home and not at least really try to come to this conference. That's obviously being a bit playful, but a wise man would. Well, anyway, I'm just having fun.
Well, I don't think you're far from the mark here. It certainly would be a good blessing and a tremendous opportunity for people to come. I think it's something that churches ought to consider sending their minister to. And if you have any elders that are able to come, they ought to come too. I mean, it's certainly going to be beneficial. And I love going to conferences. I love hearing the speakers, and these topics are going to be really significant and important. But of course, the benefit of going to an event like this, there's so much extra benefit that happens just by being present and by having the opportunities to discuss these things with people in between sessions, before and after hours. That's where the real value add is, where you get to hash these things out outside of the sessions themselves. So if you want to get a foretaste maybe of what you might be able to find in a future cohort, you might be able to get some of that informally and to, have iron sharpen iron and make some new friends and around the subject of missions and evangelism, which, that sounds like a win-win to me.
Yeah, let me throw in a couple of comments there. I think my last statements may have been just a little bit too forward, sometimes known for that. But, it is the case that this is a time. This conference is designed to be an encouragement to people. It's designed to be positive, not negative and reactionary. It's designed to lift up the saints. It's designed for lay people. This is not just a seminary student conference. It's not designed to be high-end, high-octane theological vocabulary that's inaccessible to people that are not theologically trained. So it'd be great to see lay people there from local or abroad. It'd be great to see pastors and their wives there together. I have found myself saying to a lot of seminary students and people in the church that I'm pastoring, dating is cheaper than counseling, and you are going to spend money on one or the other. So this would be a great date. This would be a great thing to take your wife to. In fact, I just heard, I think there's some very generous effort in the OPC that's actually providing for ministers and their wives to go to retreats.
I just got my letter. My wife's like, so where are we going to go?
Right. I think we just got ours too. So this is the kind of thing where, St. Augustine in the wintertime on the beach, day-and-a-half conference, great restaurants, the city's all lit up with Christmas lights still at that time of year. It would be great. Another pastor friend of mine some years ago made an interesting comment. He said, some people need counseling and other people just need community. And I wonder if one of the reasons why many people, including church servants and their spouses, end up in counseling is because they don't have sufficient healthy community. So your point a few minutes ago about making friends and just being sharpened, I think is spot on. I'm bringing my wife and hoping that she will be encouraged. I know other people that are bringing their wives, hoping that they will be encouraged as well, right? They're in that trench with us. So whether lay people, local, those traveling, we're hoping to really just lift up and edify the church. And as I said before, that's really the only purpose for which the seminaries exist.
That sounds amazing. What about for the folks who are not able to come? We very much emphasize that you want to register and be there. Is there any live stream option or recorded option for some of these materials after the fact, or perhaps future events where we might revisit some of these topics or further elaborate upon them?
Yeah, we are not going to live stream the event. One of the things that we're really hoping to do is bring people together in
Hmm.
person. There is discussion about the possibility of recording and then hosting things later on the website for the Center for Missions and Evangelism. But we're trying to bring people together. People have Zoom fatigue. I have Zoom
It's a
fatigue,
professional
and
hazard for me, Eric. And this is
yeah, no, I understand. I understand. And so you need to be there more than maybe anybody I know. But the idea of trying to get people together in person,
right.
there's a great local church there that people can go to and worship on the Lord's Day right after the conference and continue the fellowship. Florida's a pretty open state, and being near the ocean is just a healthy thing. So at least at this point, in terms of trying to think of what would be the healthiest version of this, we didn't want to just put one more thing out there
Right.
online. We wanted to try to create an in-person event, and in part because this is a precedent of hoping to bring similar conferences to different places, and just really continue to speak into the pain.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have anything scheduled at Mid-America coming up? Any courses that you are scheduled to teach this semester or next?
So there will be an advanced preaching class during the interim taught by Glenn Carey, OP minister, PhD. He's going to do a class in the winter term, and then in the spring I will be doing a applied preaching course and then a preaching lab as well. I believe the Missions and Evangelism course folds into the fall semester, if I'm remembering it correctly. But we're still, this program is new. I just started this in July. It is a part-time commitment for me, and we are, getting the thing off the ground slowly and healthily. This conference has been rather time-consuming,
Oh
as
man,
you can
event
imagine.
planning
So
is insane. I mean, if I may say
yeah,
so.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it,
So
it takes a lot of time and attention to detail, and it can be tough.
it does. And thankfully, I've got a good support crew at Mid-America. The people from Covenant OPC in St. Augustine have just been fantastic to work with again. And actually, the event itself will be at Anastasia Church, a large Baptist church over on the island that has graciously given us their facility. They hosted the one we did 2 years ago on building bridges instead of barriers, reforming race relationships in the church. So we're going back to the same spot, which is just a beautiful venue. But yeah, so once we get on the other side of that, then we're going to look to next things. But if people have an interest in what we're doing, they can find us at the Mid-America website. There's a pull-down link for the Center for Missions and
Yes.
Evangelism. The conference information is on that pull-down as well.
Yes, it's right there on the menu of the website, midamerica.edu. There's the Center for Missions and Evangelism. You'll find everything you need there, including a link to register. We'll include this information in the episode description. And depending when this episode goes out, it certainly is going to be scheduled for publication, in advance of the event itself. But you may need to act soon. Again, the event is January 28th through 29th, 2022 at Anastasia Church in St. Augustine, Florida. And it's really exciting. So we're looking forward to that, and we'll have all the information available for you there. You got any other items or things up your sleeve, Eric, that you'd like to share with our listeners or me?
Yeah, just to say my email address, so I can throw it out there.
Oh,
is,
watch out. Watch out.
Uh-oh.
Go ahead.
Maybe I won't. Well, it's on the Mid-America website, so I'm pretty accessible. But it's watkins.1@opc.org. I'd be happy to hear from people. One of the things that's been actually kind of exciting is as we've thrown out, what the center is, and people have asked questions, so tell me what it is. We've also gotten really, really good feedback from people saying, have you considered doing this?
Yes,
and
sure.
One of the things I really like a lot is that, at this stage, we're still throwing ingredients into the cake, and there's a bit of flexibility, so it's been very helpful to me to hear suggestions from people, have you considered doing this or that, or, this would be really helpful for our church. And that's the kind of thing where, it's really helpful to get that feedback. I think we and I are quite teachable in the sense of just wanting to hear from people as to what could actually be helpful and edifying. And then, we will consider doing what we can and say no to the things that we can't. But I do appreciate your willingness to have me on, Camden. As always, very grateful for your work and your friendship in the gospel as well.
Amen. Thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure. We really look forward to continuing this and hopefully have you back soon to talk about similar topics and keep the conversation going. But you can check out the links in the episode description, particularly to midamerica.edu. It's a good place to go to get everything you need. But please take a look at the Center for Missions and Evangelism there at the seminary. It's a very exciting time for the seminary, and we're really looking forward to seeing how this grows and seeing how the Lord would use it for his own glory. You can find us online at reformedforum.org. If you subscribe to the podcast and don't always get over to the website, hop over to the website once in a while. You'll find a whole host of free online courses at various levels, all the way from just adult Sunday schools up to the equivalent of postdoctoral work on Trinitarian theology. So whatever you're looking for, you'll find it at Reformed Academy, which is a section of our website at reformedforum.org. And there you'll also find information on how to get a hold of us if you have any questions or comments. But I do want to thank you for listening. We hope you join us again next time on Christ the Center.